At the family meeting called to confront me about the missing heirlooms, my sister sat beside our mother, dabbed at her eyes, and said, "I didn't want to believe it either, Mom. But things have been disappearing since Grandma died, and Nadia was the one with access to the house, and now Grandma's brooch, the pocket watch, the ring, they're all gone. I hate to say it, but who else could it be?" 11 relatives looked at me like I was a stranger, and I set my phone on the table, opened to a screen I'd spent 3 weeks assembling, and said, "Since we're talking about who sold Grandma's things, let's look at the consignment records. Because the antique dealer photographs everyone who brings items in, and I think everyone should see the photos." My sister's tears stopped mid-dab. Let me back up, because to understand why I spent 3 weeks tracking our grandmother's heirlooms across antique shops and online listings, you have to understand what those objects meant and how my sister turned her own theft into my crime, and the specific violation of being branded a thief by the very person who was robbing the family. My name is Nadia Ellison. I'm 37 years old. My older sister stole our late grandmother's heirlooms, sold them one by one for cash, and then told our entire family that I was the thief exploiting the fact that I'd been the one caring for Grandma's house until I became. In the eyes of everyone, I loved the person who desecrated our grandmother's memory for money. This is the story of how she did it, how I proved the truth, and what it costs to be falsely accused of the one crime that would make your family stop loving you. Let me tell you about the heirlooms first, because they are the heart of this, and because their value was never really about money. My grandmother, Vivian, died when I was 35, and she left behind not a fortune but something more precious, a collection of family heirlooms accumulated over her long life and the lives before hers. A brooch that had belonged to her own mother, brought over from the old country. Gold pocket watch that had been my great-grandfather's. A ring, an antique, passed down through 4 generations of women in our family. Old jewelry, a few small valuable antiques, objects that carried a century of family history in them. These weren't just things. They were the physical continuity of our family, the objects that connected us to the people we came from, the tangible proof that we were part of something older than ourselves. Grandma had been specific, in her way, about these heirlooms. She hadn't left a ridly detailed will about each object. She'd trusted her family, which was her mistake and her grace. But she'd made her wishes known. The heirlooms were to stay in the family, to be passed down, to be shared among her grandchildren and kept for the generations coming. The brooch was eventually meant for one grandchild, the ring for another, the watch for another. They were legacy, not liquidity. Grandma would have been horrified at the thought of any of them being sold, turned into cash, scattered to strangers. The family's history dissolved into a few $100s spent and gone. Now let me tell you about the arrangement after Grandma died, because it created both the opportunity for the theft and the setup for the frame. When Grandma died, her house, and the heirlooms in it, entered that limbo that family estates enter. Not yet distributed, held in common, waiting for the family to sort out who got what. And someone needed to look after the house during that period, maintain it, prepare it, keep it secure while the estate was settled. And that someone was me. Because I lived closest, because I was between things and had the flexibility, because I'd been close to Grandma and wanted to be the one to handle her home with care. I took on the caretaking of Grandma's house, and by extension, was the family member most associated with access to it. I want you to see the trap already forming, though I didn't see it at the time. I was the one with access. I was the one in and out of the house, which meant that when things went missing, I was the obvious suspect, and my sister, who engineered the whole thing, understood that from the start. My caretaking, an act of love, was about to be turned into the perfect frame. Let me tell you about my sister, Rebecca, and why she did it. Rebecca was the older sister, and our relationship had always been complicated. She was the dominant one. One used to being believed the one with more standing in the family, particularly with our mother who favored her in the quiet way mothers sometimes favor the child most like themselves. And Rebecca, in the period around Grandma's death, was in financial trouble. Real trouble, debt, a lifestyle beyond her means, pressure she hid behind a competent surface. She needed money. And she looked at Grandma's heirlooms, at a century of family history sitting in an unsecured house during the limbo of an unsettled estate, and she saw not legacy, but liquidity. She saw the cash she needed. So Rebecca began to steal them. Quietly, one at a time, over months. She had access too. She was family. She could come and go from Grandma's house, especially when I wasn't there, and she began removing heirlooms and selling them. The brooch, the pocket watch, the ring. Piece by piece, she carried our grandmother's legacy to antique dealers and consignment shops and online buyers, and converted a century of family history into cash to cover her debts. And here is where Rebecca went from thief to something worse. Because she knew the thefts would eventually be noticed, heirlooms don't stay unmissed forever, especially as the estate moved toward distribution, and people started asking where Grandma's ring was, where the watch was. Rebecca knew a reckoning was coming, so she prepared a scapegoat, me. She began, subtly, to lay the groundwork. She made comments to the family about how much access I had to the house. She expressed vague concerns about items she'd noticed might be missing, planting the idea of theft while positioning herself as the one who'd raised the alarm. She built, quietly in advance, the narrative that would explain the missing heirlooms when the family finally noticed. Nadia had access, Nadia was in the house, things went missing, therefore Nadia. She was constructing my guilt while committing her own crime, so that when the theft surfaced, the family's suspicion would land on me instead of her. Let me tell you what it was like when the accusation came, because it was the worst experience of my life. The missing heirlooms surfaced, as Rebecca knew they would, when the estate moved toward distribution and the family started looking for specific pieces. Where's Grandma's brooch? Where's the pocket watch that was supposed to go to Cousin Michael? Where's the ring? And as the objects turned up missing, one after another, Rebecca's prelayed narrative activated exactly as she designed. The family's eyes turned to me, the one with access, the one in the house, the one Rebecca had spent months subtly implicating. And Rebecca delivered the accusation with devastating skill, wrapped in false reluctance. She didn't accuse me outright at first. She didn't want to believe it. She was so torn. She hated to even think it. But the facts were the facts, and who else could it be? She performed the heartbroken sister forced to a terrible conclusion, and that performance was far more damning than a direct accusation, because it made her suspicions seem reluctant, reasonable, evidence-driven, rather than the calculated frame it was. And the family believed her. That's the part that broke me. My own mother, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, the people who'd known me my whole life, looked at me and saw a thief. Saw the person who'd exploited her position caring for Grandma's house to steal and sell our grandmother's legacy for cash. There's no accusation that could have isolated me more completely, because stealing a dead grandmother's heirlooms isn't just a crime. It's a desecration, a betrayal of the family's most sacred things, and being branded with it made me a monster in the eyes of everyone I loved. I was effectively exiled, not formally but in every way that mattered, treated with cold suspicion, excluded, spoken about, watched. The caretaking of Grandma's house was taken from me. Family members wouldn't meet my eyes. My own mother told me, with tears, that she was so disappointed, that she never thought I'd do something like this. And no amount of my denial made a dent, because Rebecca's frame was airtight, and my innocence was just my word against a mountain of circumstantial suspicion. Let me tell you about the midpoint, the moment I nearly gave up because the despair was total. Because here is the thing about being falsely accused. You cannot prove a negative. I couldn't prove I hadn't taken the heirlooms. All I had was my word, and my word had been rendered worthless by Rebecca's careful frame. The more I protested, the guiltier I looked, because of course a thief would deny it. I was trapped in the exact structure that makes false accusations so devastating. The innocent and the guilty both say, I didn't do it. And without evidence, the family believes whoever they're predisposed to believe, and they were predisposed, thanks to Rebecca's groundwork, to believe it was me. There was a period where I nearly accepted my exile, where I thought, they've decided, there's nothing I can do. Maybe I should just walk away from this family that thinks I'm a monster. The isolation was crushing. I'd lost my grandmother, and now I was losing my entire family, branded as the person who defiled her memory. I spent nights in a despair I can barely describe, mourning a grandmother and a family in the same breath. What made it almost unbearable was my mother. Because I could have withstood the cousins and the aunts believing Rebecca, they knew me less well, they were further from it. But my mother had raised me. She had 37 years of evidence about who I was, and she took Rebecca's side in an afternoon. I remember the conversation that nearly broke me. I went to her alone and I begged her, Mom, you know me. You raised me. Do you really believe I would steal Grandma's things and sell them? Do you really believe that of me? And my mother looked at me with tears and said, I don't want to believe it, but Nadia, the evidence. You had access and Rebecca wouldn't lie about something like this, and I don't know what to think anymore. Rebecca wouldn't lie about something like this. That sentence was the whole wound of my childhood in 8 words. Because Rebecca would lie was lying, at that very moment, monstrously. And my mother's lifelong inability to see it, her reflexive trust in her favored daughter and reflexive doubt of me, was the exact vulnerability Rebecca had built her whole frame on. Rebecca didn't just exploit my access to the house. She exploited our mother's favoritism, 37 years in the making, knowing that when it came down to Rebecca's word against mine, our mother's heart would tip toward Rebecca before the evidence was even in. The frame worked because the family was already built to believe it. And then I got angry. And the anger saved me because it pointed me at a question. If I didn't take the heirlooms, then someone did. The heirlooms were really gone, really sold. That part was true. Someone had actually sold Grandma's things, and if I could find out who, I could prove it wasn't me. The frame depended on the assumption that the thief was untraceable, but heirlooms don't vanish. They get sold, and sales leave records. Here is what I did. First, I thought like a seller. If someone was selling Grandma's heirlooms, where would they sell them? Antique shops, consignment stores, online marketplaces, jewelry buyers. These aren't invisible transactions. Antiques and jewelry world keeps records. Consignment shops document who brings items in. Online listings are photographed and archived. Reputable dealers require ID and keep transaction records precisely to avoid trafficking in stolen goods. So I became a detective. I knew what the heirlooms looked like. I'd grown up with them. I had old family photos showing Grandma wearing the brooch and the ring. And I began, methodically, to search. I scoured online marketplaces and auction sites for the specific pieces. I visited and called antique shops and consignment stores in the region, describing the items, asking if anything matching had come through. It was painstaking, weeks of work, driven by the desperate energy of someone fighting for her name, and I found them. Let me tell you about the day I walked into Harold's shop, because it's the day the frame started to crack. I'd been at it for 2 weeks by then, dozens of shops, endless online scrolling, describing a brooch and a watch and a ring to skeptical strangers, getting nowhere, running mostly on the fumes of desperation. I started to think maybe Rebecca had been smarter than I gave her credit for. Maybe she'd sold to buyers who kept no records. Maybe I'd never find them. And then I walked into a consignment shop in a town about 40 minutes from Grandma's house, far enough that a family member wouldn't stumble on it, run by an older man named Harold. I showed Harold the old family photograph, Grandma, decades ago, wearing the brooch. I'm trying to find this piece, I said. It's a family heirloom. It may have been sold recently, and I have reason to believe it was sold without the family's permission. Harold looked at the photo for a long moment, and then he looked at me carefully, the way a man does when he's deciding whether to trust you. Why do you want to know? He asked, and I told him the truth. All of it, that my grandmother had died, that the heirlooms had gone missing, that my family believed I'd stolen them, that I was trying to find out what had really happened to clear my name. And something in my telling must have rung true, because Harold's face softened and he said, I keep records of everything I take in. Photographs, ID, dates. I've been doing this 30 years, and I've learned the hard way that the secondhand business lives or dies on being able to prove where things came from. Let me check something. He went into a back room and came out with a file. And he laid down a photograph, Grandma's brooch, unmistakable, the same piece from the family photo, and beside it a consignment record, a name, a copy of a driver's license, a date, and a photograph of the person who'd brought it in, my sister. That's the woman who consigned it, Harold said gently, watching my face. Do you know her? She's my sister, I said, and I had to sit down. Harold, I would learn, was exactly the kind of honest, meticulous dealer that a thief like Rebecca should have feared and didn't. He photographed every item. He recorded every consignor's information, took a copy of their ID, documented the date, because dealing in secondhand valuables means protecting yourself against exactly the accusation of handling stolen goods. When I described Grandma's brooch and showed him the old family photo, his records had confirmed everything. He'd taken that piece on consignment, and he had a full record of who'd brought it in. It was Rebecca. Her name, her ID, her photograph in Harold's records. On the date she consigned our grandmother's brooch for sale. I want to describe the feeling of that moment, sitting in Harold's shop, looking at my sister's ID photo in his consignment records, holding the proof that she was the thief and I was the frame. It was vindication and heartbreak at once. Vindication because I finally had what I needed to clear my name. Heartbreak because it was undeniable now. My own sister had stolen Grandma's legacy and deliberately, calculatedly, tried to destroy me to cover it. There'd been a small part of me that hoped, even then, for some other explanation. Harold's records ended that hope, and Harold wasn't the only one. Armed with the pattern, I found more an online listing for the pocket watch, traceable to Rebecca's account, another consignment shop with a record of the ring, a chain of documentation across multiple sellers, all leading to my sister. Rebecca had sold our grandmother's heirlooms across a scatter of shops and sites, thinking the dispersal made her untraceable, when in fact every single sale had generated a record with her name on it. The thief who framed me had signed her real name to the theft, over and over, because it never occurred to her that the scapegoat would become the detective. I gathered all of it. Photographs, consignment records, ID copies, listings, dates, a complete documentary chain proving that Rebecca had sold every missing heirloom. And I chose to reveal it the way these things have to be revealed, in front of the whole family, at the very meeting where they intended to formally condemn me. Because Rebecca, emboldened, had pushed for exactly that, a family meeting to confront me about the missing heirlooms, to force a reckoning, to cement my guilt and my exile. She wanted the family gathered to condemn the thief. She got her wish. She just didn't know the thief in the room was her. Let me tell you about that meeting. 11 relatives gathered to confront me, my mother grim and heartbroken, Rebecca beside her performing the reluctant accuser. And Rebecca delivered her practiced speech. She didn't want to believe it, but things had been disappearing since Grandma died, and I was the one with access, and the brooch and the watch and the ring were all gone, and who else could it be? 11 relatives looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was the person who desecrated Grandma's memory, and I set my phone on the table. Since we're talking about who sold Grandma's things, I said, let's look at the consignment records. Because the antique dealer photographs everyone who brings items in, and I think everyone should see the photos. Rebecca's tears stopped mid-dab. For weeks, I said, you've all believed I stole Grandma's heirlooms because Rebecca made sure I was the one with access, and because I couldn't prove I didn't do it. So I stopped trying to prove a negative and I did something better. I found the heirlooms. Every one of them, because they were sold and sales leave records. I laid it out piece by piece. This is Grandma's brooch in the consignment records of a dealer named Harold. Here's the date it was consigned. Here's the ID of the person who brought it in. Here's their photograph. I turned the phone toward the table. That's not me, that's Rebecca. The room went utterly silent. Here's the pocket watch, I continued, listed online from Rebecca's account. Here's the ring at another consignment shop, Rebecca's name on the record. Here's the whole chain, every missing heirloom, sold by Rebecca, at shops and sites across the region, each sale documented with her real name and ID, because reputable dealers keep records to protect against handling stolen goods. Rebecca didn't just steal Grandma's legacy, she sold it. Signed her name to every sale, and then framed me for it. Spent months making sure I'd be the suspect, so that when you all noticed, the heirlooms were gone. You blamed the sister who was caring for the house, instead of the sister who was selling the family's history to cover her debts. I looked at my mother. You told me you were disappointed in me, that you never thought I'd do something like this. I need you to look at these records, Mom. And then I need you to understand that while you were grieving over the daughter you thought was a thief, the actual thief was sitting next to you, holding your hand, telling you it was me. Here is how it ended. The records were undeniable, photographs, IDs, dates, a documented chain across multiple sellers, all leading to Rebecca. There was no performance that could survive it. Rebecca tried, of course, tried to claim she'd sold them for the family, tried to say she was going to tell everyone, tried to reframe, tried the tears. But you cannot cry your way out of a consignment record with your own ID photo attached, and the family, who moments before had seen me as a monster, watched the truth invert in real time. The reluctant accuser was the thief. The exiled suspect was innocent. The frame collapsed completely in the span of a few photographs. Rebecca faced consequences beyond exposure. Selling estate property that wasn't hers to sell, heirlooms that belonged to the family collectively taken and sold for her own benefit, is theft, and there was real legal and financial reckoning. Much of the family's energy went into the more painful work of processing that Rebecca had not only stolen from them, but had tried to destroy an innocent sister to do it. Some of the heirlooms were recovered. A few of the buyers, learning the items had been stolen and framed onto another person, were willing to return them, and Harold in particular was mortified and helpful. But some were gone for good, sold on, scattered, irrecoverable. That's the bittersweet heart of it. I cleared my name, but I could not undo the loss of Grandma's things. The brooch her mother brought from the old country, the 4-generation ring, some of those were simply gone, converted to cash Rebecca had already spent, lost to the family forever. My vindication came too late to save all of the legacy it was about. My mother's reckoning was its own hard story. She had believed Rebecca. She had looked at me, her daughter, and seen a thief, and told me she was disappointed, and taken Rebecca's side with tears in her eyes. Now she had to sit with the fact that she condemned her innocent daughter, and comforted her guilty one, that her lifelong favoring of Rebecca had made her the perfect audience for Rebecca's frame. She apologized, eventually and deeply, but it took me a long time to forgive the ease with which she believed the worst of me, because that ease was its own wound, older than this crime, and this crime had only revealed it. We rebuilt, slowly. It's better now. It's not what it was, because I know now how quickly she'll believe I'm the villain, and that knowledge doesn't fully heal. Harold, the antique dealer, I stayed grateful to, the meticulous record keeper whose ordinary professional caution became the thing that cleared my name. He didn't know, when he photographed a woman consigning a brooch, that he was documenting the evidence that would save an innocent person he'd never met. But he was. The boring diligence of an honest dealer undid a calculated frame. I sent him a letter of thanks he probably didn't expect. For weeks, my sister had the whole family believing I'd stolen and sold our grandmother's heirlooms, that I'd exploited my care for Grandma's house to desecrate her memory for cash. She committed the theft and painted it onto me, exploiting my access, my love, my caretaking, turning the very things that made me trustworthy into the evidence of my guilt. She built a perfect frame. It had only one flaw, and it was the same flaw every one of these schemes has. She assumed the truth was untraceable. She assumed that because I couldn't prove I didn't do it, I was trapped. She forgot that the heirlooms she'd sold hadn't vanished. They'd gone somewhere, to dealers and buyers and shops, and every honest one of them kept records, and every record had her name on it, not mine. She signed her real name to the theft, over and over, certain the scapegoat would never think to look. She never imagined that the sister she'd branded a thief would become the one person determined enough to trace every piece of Grandma's stolen legacy back to the hand that actually sold it. I couldn't prove I was innocent, so I proved she was guilty. And it turned out those were the same thing, because the heirlooms she stole to frame me were the exact evidence that cleared me, each one a record with her name attached, waiting in a consignment file for someone to care enough to look. I cared enough. She was counting on the family's love for her and their easy suspicion of me. She forgot that I loved Grandma too, enough to chase her stolen legacy across every antique shop in the region, not for the money, but for the truth. And the truth, in the end, was photographed and filed and dated, sitting in Harold's records the whole time, with my sister's face on it, waiting to set me free.